First and foremost, I think everyone across the National Football League is happy that Raheem Morris is getting this opportunity. He's an extremely popular person who, as you point out, was a coach at one time in the NFL, has paid his dues, whatever term you want to use. I believe you hired him originally in New York, didn't you?
Yeah, he was a coaching intern from Hofstra, and he's one of these guys, Green, he's impossible not to like. He just brings in energy. He smiles easily. Graz made a good point. Feels like 150 years ago, he was a head coach of Tampa Bay with Mark Dominic. They were like 32 and 33. I like the fact that he sort of went to the other side of the ball, helped clock management with Dan Quinn. So he's checked the boxes to get back to where he deserves.
Exactly. And to the point that I think Graziano was trying to make, and again, it all was a little bit rushed because of, just timing beyond our control. Yeah, it's Medvedev's fault.
Right.
But the point of the matter is, look, we sit here so often, people sit and complain about how the league just keeps recycling old white guys as their coaches. Well, now they're doing the opposite of that, and so all of that should be celebrated.
Yes.
However, when Bill Belichick wants a job and can't get one, it is extremely noteworthy. This is a man who has head coached teams to 9 Super Bowls in his career. He is a handful of games away from being the winningest coach in the history of the National Football League. So I'm not suggesting that there are no reasons. Obviously, there are reasons. But it is most certainly noteworthy, Dan, that if Bill Belichick wants to be a coach, there are 32 teams in theory that could hire him, and all of them are choosing not to.
Correct, and I think it's significant. We can talk about the reasons why, and we can make them make sense on a number of levels, but it's significant because it indicates a change. It indicates, look, the Seattle Seahawks surprised everybody with the Pete Carroll move, right? But at this point, they're trying to go get something new, right? Pete Carroll's in his 70s, Bill Belichick's in his 70s. You're trying to. When you're hiring a coach, you're ideally thinking, and Mike T, correct me if I'm wrong, and I know it doesn't work out this way, but you're thinking about, I want this guy to be here 10, 15 years
100%.
in a perfect world, right? So a 72-year-old's not going to be there 10, 15 years, right? And so I think this is. I think the story of this week in the NFL is fresh faces, new faces, and teams thinking about what can be as opposed to what was.
All right, so Schefter, I don't feel like you got the chance. The reason I wanted to come back to this, I don't feel like you got the chance to say all the things that you have going on. So go, Schefter. What do we need? Fill in all of the blanks for us here.
Well, I think there's so much going on here right now, and it's happening so fast because I think the league has wanted teams to wait until after the conference championship games this weekend before they wrap up their interviews and hire coaches. And this is the slowest hiring cycle that we've ever watched, and it's that way on purpose because that's the way the league has wanted it. They've changed the rules to where you can't interview coaches under contract face-to-face until after this past week in the divisional playoff round. So you were seeing a slew of face-to-face interviews this past week. And this is a process that really started Sunday night, January 7th, when the Falcons fired Arthur Smith. We are now January 26th, almost 3 weeks in. Whereas in the past, when guys like Mike Tannenbaum were running the Dolphins, they had a head coach within 4, 5, 6 days after the season ended. The league has slowed this down and drawn it out dramatically. And yet, we still see a slew of changes to the point where in the NFC South, Todd Bowles is now the most tenured coach in that division. If Andy Reid were to walk away at the end of this season, and that's floating out there, we'll see whether that happens. If he were, Sean Payton would be the most tenured coach in the AFC West division. And that just shows you how much change there is going on and how much impatience there is with teams. And yet, now, even with all this change, and there have been 8 so far this year, 6 openings filled, to your point, Greeny, the greatest coach who ever did it is on the sidelines. And you have to wonder, okay, well, he's not getting one now, it looks like. Who's going to give him one next year? He's going to hang over everything, but at the same time, he's another year older. So does somebody give him the chance? What does Bill Belichick do to keep himself involved, fresh, on top of the game so that he's still relevant and still hireable, which is laughable, to next year? And again, I want to go back to that point because one head coach called me last night, and he's like, what universe are we living in that Bill Belichick doesn't get a head coach? What team owner doesn't bring on Bill Belichick, even in collaboration with another coach? Go hire Dave Canales and bring in Bill Belichick with him and have Dave Canales be the coach in training, learning from the greatest who ever did it.
Just because he's the greatest ever did, don't mean, listen, I say it all the time. Either die the hero or stay long enough to yourself to become a villain. And, like, he casts a big shadow. And if I'm a coach or an incoming coach, why would I want to have Bill Belichick hovering over me, trying to mold me and tell me to do it his way? Like, we've seen this before. Chuck Noll was a great coach. The league moved on. Like, the same way we said about players, the same thing we said about coaches. You know, when I first got in the league, the cycle was Denny Green, it was Bill Cowher, it was Brian Billick, my coach, and the league eventually moved on. So I'm happy to see that new blood is getting into the cycle. And Bill Belichick, if he wants to, he's got to reinvent himself. The genius about Nick Saban and why I think he was always able to be successful, because he always surrounded himself with young, exciting coordinators that came in, that kept him relevant, kept him young. Bill Belichick kept the usual suspects around him, and the game passed him by a little bit.
All right, there are 4 teams trying to win the Super Bowl. The other 28 are into their offseason. The coaching carousel has been spinning, and yesterday it stopped in Atlanta. Congratulations to Raheem Morris, who gets that job. He's someone a lot of people around the NFL have been rooting for to get another opportunity, and he does get that chance now in Atlanta. This is a spot that so many people thought was going to be the one where Bill Belichick landed. But as you look at the vacancies that existed, there were 8 of them at one time. There are 2 that remain. And as you see, Bill Belichick is not in any of those spots and does not appear as though he's going to get any of the other 2. Ryan Clark, you called this shot 2 weeks ago on this show. You said, while everyone else is saying, oh, teams are going to be firing coaches to go and bring in Bill Belichick. Oh! Here are all these teams that have made the decision not to, including the one that, for whatever reason, everyone had put together to begin with.
Well, the conversation started by people saying that you were going to fire playoff head coaches because Bill Belichick was available. And I said, well, why would you do that? Why would you fire a coach who is young, who has galvanized your locker room enough to get them in the playoffs? And it was because he's Bill Belichick. And my thought was that's the reason you wouldn't rush to hire him, that the game has changed, that his 4 years without Tom Brady weren't the stellar years that we'd seen before. And that it struck me watching Bill Belichick's introductory press conference and then what he became, right? The more he won, the entitlement in the way that he dealt with the media also became an entitlement of the way I ran things around the building. When you'd see people who talked about the Patriot way, loving the discipline, loving the education, loving the preparation, but also saying, you know, there were times I didn't want to pick my head up in the hallway. Right? When I'm playing for Dick LeBeau, who every April comes into the building during OTAs and thanks us for allowing him to coach us. Right? And so now as we see the new NIL kid grow, when we see some of the entitlement of these young men, some of the ways that they want to be related to, some of the branding that they want to be a part of, that's passed Bill Belichick by, not the X's and O's. And so much was said that Bill Belichick would be interviewing teams. If you walk into a building thinking that you're interviewing teams full of rooms that are filled with alpha males, they're going to feel a certain way about that. And so I do think that Bill Belichick lost this job. I do believe that Arthur Blank wanted him to be the head coach. I do believe when you look at the resume of the 6 championships, it's enticing. Yeah. But when you sit across from a man and you don't have that feeling that he's the right man to lead this locker room, you have to make a different decision. And the Falcons were brave enough to do that.
And it was a tough decision, but at this point, I believe that Bill Belichick is a finisher. He's not a program builder. He's not a roster developer. Like, he's not a guy that's going to come in and turn your program around. He's a guy that needs a finished product. I said that earlier, like John Gruden. Like, you have a team that can't get over the hump, they plateaued, then he's a guy that can come in and get you over the hump. But he's not a guy that's going to come in, hire coaches, change the culture. That's a lot to do unless, you know, for a 71-year-old man that you think it's going to take a couple years. Just look at what happened in Detroit. Not saying that it's any teams that is dire than when Dan Campbell got the job. But, you know, he had to be somewhere like maybe if Sean McDermott would have got let go. Or if, you know, you think Sirianni would have got let go. He needed a team like that. And maybe that team still exists, but just not this year. So he has to go away like Mike McCarthy did, self-evaluate, figure out about who he's going to put on his staff, because the other thing that's a deterrent for Bill Belichick is I don't want Josh McDaniels to be my future coach, to heir apparent. I don't want Matt Patricia. So who's he going to bring in? And they're always paired to Bill Belichick. So if he has some young, like, innovative, say if he had Lincoln Riley or something, like let's just say, or a Lincoln Riley type that we don't know about, like, well, when he leaves, this is the guy that's going to lead us in the future, right? You talk about developing a young quarterback and saying Bill Belichick just failed miserably with Mac Jones. Mac Jones is broken. Like he was better his first year, right? He was better his first year than he was his last year, right? And it got worse. And some of the decisions that Bill made, like making Matt Patricia the offensive coordinator, you have to question some of the decisions that he's made since Tom Brady has left.
Yeah, and that's the part that really inspires me. Like when you look at our profession, that's a great example about Mike McCarthy. Dan Quinn moved to Hawaii, changed his defense. We got fired from Atlanta. Obviously, he's had success in Dallas. And knowing Coach Belichick, I think after he gets through the emotion of what happened, because Tarsi's point, I think everyone, including him, expected okay, I'm going to be able to pick Atlanta or Washington. That didn't happen. I think he's going to do exactly that, Greeny. I think he's going to take a half a step back and say, I need to build an offense for 2025 that's going to be indefensible, the way Nick Saban evolved. And I think that's the interesting part of the story. And I think when you talk about where can he go close, that they're not looking for a 10-year place, Dallas goes to the top of that list. Philadelphia goes to the top of that list.
Buffalo.
Buffalo. And as Adam Schefter said earlier, guys, in the fall, anytime a team goes on a 3-game losing streak, Brian Daboll, all these guys, they're going to have to answer the question about.
Because we're stupid, right? That's why. And we were stupid when Bill Belichick agreed to mutually part ways from New England, because we feed those stories, not the true people who are making the decisions, which is who I was thinking about when we were having this conversation 2 weeks ago. We look at Bill Belichick because legacy is our thing, right? The resume is our thing. History is his thing, not mine. He's way smarter than me. And so when you look at Bill Belichick, we were looking at all those things. Because you are the greatest coach of all time does not mean you're the best coach right now.